June 23, 2025, Red Sea, 200 nautical miles off Yemen's rugged coastline. The horizon shimmered under the morning sun, the sea deceptively calm. For the 5,000 sailors aboard the USS Dwight D. Eisenhower, one of America's most powerful nuclear-powered aircraft carriers, it was supposed to be another routine patrol. A visible reminder of U.S. naval dominance in one of the world's most strategic waterways. But at 7:18 local time, everything changed. A cluster of small fishing boats, typical of Yemen's coastal communities, drifted closer than usual. They looked harmless, just another band of fishermen braving the waves for their daily catch. Yet beneath the wooden hulls and weathered nets, a deadly secret waited. Suddenly, radar operators on the Eisenhower's Combat Information Center spotted something unusual: multiple heat signatures emerging from the deck of one of the fishing boats. Within seconds, the ship's alarm blared across every corridor. The innocuous-looking fishing vessel had transformed into a launch platform. Streaks of fire shot skyward, missiles, not nets, rising in terrifying unison. Incoming hypersonic profile, multiple tracks. A voice screamed over the comms. These weren't ordinary rockets. The weapons identified were Zulfiqar Basir short-range ballistic missiles and the far more advanced Fatah-1 hypersonic glide vehicles, Iranian designs exported covertly to Yemen's Houthi movement. These were the same missiles the Pentagon had long worried about. Agile, Mach 13 plus capable, and designed specifically to defeat modern air defense systems like the Aegis and SM-6 interceptors protecting U.S. carrier strike groups. Seconds later, the sky above the carrier battle group turned into a lethal firestorm. The Eisenhower's Phalanx CIWS, close-in weapon system, screamed to life, tracers ripping upward in desperate arcs. SM-2 and SM-6 interceptors launched from accompanying cruisers, leaving thick smoke trails. Yet one hypersonic missile broke through, slamming into the carrier's forward flight deck. The explosion shook the 100,000-ton giant, sending crew members tumbling. Shrapnel ripped through parked FA-18E Super Hornets and ignited aviation fuel, creating a wall of fire. For the first time in decades, an American aircraft carrier had been successfully struck in open sea. The unimaginable had happened, not from a rival superpower, but from an irregular force using fishing boats and Iranian-made missiles. The question that instantly echoed through Washington and every NATO operations center was chilling. How could a small rebel group with disguised boats deliver a blow to one of the world's most powerful warships? And that was just the beginning. This is the untold story of how the U.S. Navy faced its worst nightmare, how deadly Iranian missile technology reshaped modern naval warfare, and how America struck back with an operation that changed the course of this conflict forever. The attack unfolded with chilling precision, almost like a scene from a war game. But this was no simulation. The Houthi unit responsible for the assault had spent weeks preparing. Intelligence later revealed that they had disguised 2 mothership trawlers and 6 smaller dhows as ordinary fishing vessels, their decks cluttered with nets and bait barrels to avoid suspicion. Hidden beneath canvas tarps were Iranian-supplied Zulfiqar Basir ballistic missiles and one Fatah-1 hypersonic glide vehicle loaded on a rail launcher. At 7:18 local time, the deception turned lethal. The dhows peeled away from the main group, drifting closer to the USS Eisenhower under the pretense of avoiding rough waves. Seconds later, their decks erupted with fire as missile motors ignited. Surveillance drones from the carrier captured the moment in stark clarity. White plumes of smoke stabbing into the sky, a fisherman's net burning away as a hypersonic weapon roared free. The Fatah-1 was the real nightmare, with a top speed of Mach 13 and a maneuverable re-entry vehicle. It could outpace almost every legacy interceptor in the U.S. Navy's inventory. Its trajectory was erratic, banking sharply at mid-course before plunging toward the Eisenhower's flight deck. Radar operators screamed warnings as interceptors tried to lock on. The Aegis system launched SM-6 interceptors at incredible speed, while the carrier's own CIWS spat 20mm rounds into the air. One missile was shredded mid-air, but another cut through untouched. The impact was devastating. The Fata-1 tore into the forward section of the flight deck near Elevator 2, detonating its 500-kilogram warhead. The explosion ripped open the deck plating, scattering debris and throwing burning aviation fuel across parked FA-18s. 3 sailors were injured instantly. Others scrambled to fight the fire as smoke billowed into the sky. Simultaneously, 2 Zulfiqar Basir missiles slammed into the carrier's defensive perimeter. One was intercepted, but the other detonated near the ship's port bow, damaging radar arrays and jamming sensors. Within minutes, the U.S. Navy's flagship in the Red Sea was fighting to stay operational. For U.S. military analysts, this was unthinkable. A non-state militia using disguised civilian boats had executed a coordinated high-tech missile strike capable of penetrating one of the most sophisticated defense networks on Earth. The shock reverberated from the Pentagon to the White House. What many had quietly feared for years, that Iranian missile technology could destabilize entire naval doctrines, had just played out in real time. The carrier strike group had no time to mourn its losses. Within minutes of the first explosions, the USS Eisenhower's Combat Information Center shifted from shock to execution mode. Emergency damage control teams sealed bulkheads and fought fires on the forward deck, while the air wing scrambled surviving FA-18EF Super Hornets from the undamaged aft section of the flight deck. At 0731 local time, Task Force 50 initiated its first counterattack. 2 EA-18G Growlers immediately launched, unleashing electronic warfare packages designed to blind enemy radars and communications along the Yemeni coastline. This was followed by 4 FA-18E Super Hornets, each armed with AGM-154, Joint Standoff Weapons, and AGM-88E AARGM anti-radiation missiles. Their target, the suspected Houthi launch platforms hiding near the port of Hodeidah. But there was a problem. The attackers had vanished. Intelligence drones deployed from the destroyer USS Gravely showed the disguised fishing dhows now scattered, blending among hundreds of legitimate fishing vessels in the area. The strike group hesitated to fire on civilian-looking targets without positive identification, a limitation the Houthis had calculated in advance. Instead, U.S. forces struck known fixed military sites along the coast, radar stations, ammunition depots, and suspected missile storage bunkers. The precision strike obliterated 2 small coastal installations and a radar array, but the main attackers, the mobile missile platforms, were gone. Meanwhile, Aegis-equipped destroyers in the group continued scanning for additional launches. The USS Philippine Sea fired another SM-6 interceptor as radar picked up a possible second missile, but it turned out to be a decoy drone, a tactic meant to draw out interceptors and drain U.S. missile reserves. Rear Admiral Marcus Leland, commander of the strike group, radioed Washington with a chilling update. "We've neutralized 2 fixed positions, but the mobile launchers are ghosting us. They're operating like an asymmetric navy, and they've studied our rules of engagement." It was the first time a U.S. aircraft carrier had been forced to conduct offensive strikes while itself crippled and under threat from non-state actors armed with hypersonic weapons. The Pentagon immediately realized this was no isolated incident, but part of a deliberate strategy designed to test and humiliate American naval dominance. The first counterattack revealed a harsh truth. The enemy had studied American naval doctrine and exploited its weaknesses. The Pentagon convened an emergency session within hours of the incident, connecting CENTCOM in Qatar, Fifth Fleet in Bahrain, and the National Security Council in Washington. Rear Admiral Marcus Leland's after-action report painted a sobering picture. The enemy used civilian disguise to approach within missile range undetected, Fatah-1 hypersonic glide vehicles, supplied by Iran, had bypassed Aegis interceptors and slammed into the carrier's deck. Decoy drones drained U.S. interceptor stocks and exposed response times. For the first time in decades, a U.S. carrier strike group had been forced into defensive posture against non-state actors, something historically reserved for near-peer rivals. U.S. naval intelligence recommended immediate deployment of MQ-9B Sea Guardian drones to locate mobile missile launchers before they could strike again. Cyber Command launched an offensive to disrupt Houthi communications, targeting Iranian data relays suspected of guiding the hypersonic strike. Meanwhile, Navy logisticians pushed a critical shift in intercept doctrine. Instead of expending multi-million-dollar SM-6 missiles on every radar contact, the fleet would integrate lower-cost countermeasures. Directed energy weapons aboard destroyers already in testing phases. AGM-114 Hellfire variants, mounted on MH-60R Seahawks for rapid, low-cost kills of small craft. Laser systems capable of neutralizing decoy drones without wasting interceptors. Satellite imagery from the National Reconnaissance Office identified a suspicious warehouse complex near Al Hudaida's fishing harbor. Signals intercepts confirmed encrypted traffic between that site and Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, specifically units linked to missile exports. Analysts concluded the Houthis were using Iranian command and control expertise, meaning this was no rogue action, but a coordinated regional escalation. A joint CIA naval intelligence briefing to the White House summarized it bluntly. This is a hybrid warfare model, civilian disguise, hypersonic weaponry, remote Iranian guidance. It represents the most dangerous asymmetric threat to U.S. naval dominance since World War II. President Reynolds authorized an escalation. Direct action to neutralize missile stockpiles in Yemen, and an expanded surveillance net on Iranian missile transfers. For the U.S. Navy, this was no longer about one carrier. It was about changing how America fights at sea. Within 36 hours of the attack, Operation Midnight Hammer was green-lit by the President and executed by Central Command. The objective was clear: cripple Houthi missile capability and send a direct message to Tehran, the technology supplier behind the assault. At 2 a.m. local time, B-2 Spirit stealth bombers lifted off from Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri, refueled mid-air over Europe, and approached Yemeni airspace undetected. Each bomber carried 2 GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrators, bunker buster bombs designed to destroy hardened missile storage facilities. Simultaneously, 2 Ohio-class guided missile submarines positioned in the Arabian Sea launched 24 Tomahawk cruise missiles at suspected launch sites and coastal radar arrays. From the deck of the still-damaged USS Eisenhower, flight operations resumed on a limited basis. FA-18E Super Hornets roared into the night sky armed with AGM-154JSOW glide bombs targeting mobile missile trailers previously located by MQ-9B Sea Guardian drones. Electronic warfare aircraft jammed enemy communications, blinding their radars for the duration of the assault. The strikes were devastating. A warehouse near Al Hudaida, later confirmed as an Iranian-supplied missile assembly point, was obliterated, leaving a crater the size of a city block. 2 mobile launchers, including one believed to have fired the Fatah-1, were destroyed along with their crews. Coastal radar stations used to track U.S. warships went offline. However, the retaliation was not without consequences. Intelligence indicated at least one Fatah-1 hypersonic missile survived the initial bombardment, moved inland before impact. Analysts worried the Houthis could still mount another symbolic strike even after suffering severe losses. The Pentagon broadcast high-resolution satellite images of the destroyed sites within 12 hours, sending a clear message to Tehran: "We know where your technology is, and we will eliminate it at the source." Iranian state media condemned the strikes as American aggression against Yemeni sovereignty, but avoided direct acknowledgement of providing advanced missiles. For the sailors aboard the Eisenhower, the operation was cathartic. The damage on their deck still smoked, but morale shifted. They had struck back hard, proving that even when wounded, the U.S. Navy was far from helpless. The attack on the USS Eisenhower and the subsequent U.S. retaliation forced military planners to confront a reality long theorized but rarely tested: asymmetric maritime warfare using hypersonic weapons. For decades, American carrier strike groups had been considered untouchable symbols of power projection. The Houthis strike, enabled by Iranian-supplied Fatah-1 hypersonic glide vehicles and Zulfiqar Basir ballistic missiles, shattered that perception. If a non-state militia could damage a U.S. carrier, then what could a fully resourced state actor accomplish in a future conflict? The Pentagon responded by accelerating the deployment of directed energy laser weapons aboard destroyers, designed to counter high-speed threats without depleting expensive missile inventories. A new interceptor drone program nicknamed Skyguard was fast-tracked to create airborne picket lines capable of intercepting hypersonic weapons before they reached strike groups. The incident exposed gaps in persistent surveillance. Fishing boats had disguised missiles and approached undetected because the Navy focused on traditional radar signatures. In response, a joint Navy Space Force task force began integrating low-orbit satellites with AI-based image analysis, giving commanders real-time alerts about small craft operating suspiciously near high-value assets. On the strategic level, the CIA and DIA concluded that the attack was more than a Houthi operation. It was a proof of concept orchestrated by Iran's IRGC aerospace force. The Fatah-1 hypersonic missile, previously believed to be in limited domestic use, had been exported for combat testing. The attack galvanized allies. NATO partners, Japan and Australia, pledged to enhance maritime patrol coverage in high-threat zones. Israel quietly increased intelligence sharing on Iranian missile movements, while Gulf states opened additional airfields for U.S. drone surveillance. The message was clear: the United States would adapt, modernize, and lead a coalition to counter hypersonic proliferation before it eroded global naval stability. For sailors aboard the Eisenhower, the new doctrine was personal. They had lived through what textbooks called a future war scenario, and they were determined it would never happen again without overwhelming preparation. The attack on the USS Eisenhower will be studied for decades. It was not just an isolated strike by a militant faction. It was a strategic wake-up call. A group of fighters using disguised fishing boats and Iranian-made hypersonic missiles had delivered a blow once thought impossible, damaging a U.S. aircraft carrier in open sea. The retaliation, Operation Midnight Hammer, proved that the United States could still strike back with overwhelming precision and speed. But it also revealed a deeper truth. The rules of naval warfare are changing. In this new era, speed, deception, and technological surprise can offset traditional military dominance. For American defense planners, the incident accelerated urgent modernization, directed energy defenses to handle mass missile swarms without exhausting missile stockpiles, persistent drone surveillance to track small, unconventional launch platforms, rapid decision AI systems to counter hypersonic flight profiles in seconds, not minutes. For the world, it carried a sharper warning. Asymmetric actors can now wield strategic weapons once reserved for nation-states. What was done by the Houthis with Iranian assistance could, in the future, be replicated elsewhere by pirates, proxy militias, or rogue states willing to gamble on escalation. Yet there was also resilience. Even after sustaining damage, the Eisenhower's crew fought fires, restored flight operations, and participated in the counterstrike. Their ability to adapt under fire demonstrated why, despite evolving threats, the U.S. Navy remains formidable. The final lesson is sobering but empowering. Future conflicts will not be won solely by the largest ship or the most missiles, but by innovation, adaptability, and readiness to face the unexpected. If a group of disguised fishing boats with advanced missiles can damage one of the most powerful warships in the world, what does it mean for the future of naval warfare and global security? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Do you believe asymmetric warfare will redefine military power? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you won't miss our next deep dive into the changing face of modern conflict.